The sound of raindrops drumming rhythmically on the window mingled with the ticking of the antique wall clock in Dr. Evan Mercer's office. The clock, with its wooden case darkened by time and slightly tarnished face, was the only thing he had, taken from his parents' house. Not photographs, not books, not mementos, just a clock that measured time with the same inexorable precision with which human memory distorts it. Evan sat in a leather chair across from his patient, watching the subtle movements of her eyes beneath her closed lids. Catherine Wilson, 28, the sole surviving witness in the Oakwood Park attacks, was in a deep, hypnotic trance. She had spent 3 months in the grip of a psychological block, unable to remember the face of the man who had attacked her and killed. Her friend Jessica Wright. "Go back to that evening, Catherine." Evan's voice was soft but sure, like Ariadne's thread leading through a labyrinth of forgotten memories. "You and Jessica are walking back through the park. It's getting dark. Tell me what you see around you." Catherine's fingers gripped the arms of the chair, her knuckles white with tension. "The lights, they're just starting to come on. Jessica says we should have taken a taxi. She's nervous." "And you? Are you nervous too?" "No. I mean, not right away." I laugh at her, tell her we'll save the money for a cocktail next time. And then I hear footsteps behind us. Evan glanced quickly at Detective Rachel Morgan, who sat in the corner of the office. She was taking notes on a small notepad, her face impassive, but her eyes gleaming with something like hope. The Oakwood Park shootings had been unsolved for 4 months, and the pressure on the police department was mounting. "You turn around, Catherine. What do you see?" I can't see. It's dark. He's like a shadow." "Focus on the details. Any detail you can pick out." "His clothes, maybe." Catherine frowned, her breathing becoming more ragged. "A dark jacket, a hood, and something on it. Some kind of logo or patch." "What logo, Catherine? Focus on it." It's a bird, a red bird on a dark background, like an eagle or a hawk." Evan noticed Rachel sit up straighter in her chair, her pen hovering over her notepad. "Very good, Catherine. And his face? Can you see his face?" A long pause. The woman's breathing became deeper, as if she were going deeper into a trance, deeper into the memories her mind was trying to bury. He's closer now. I can see his eyes. Cold, gray like ice, and a scar across his right eyebrow, thin but noticeable. Anything else? Any detail could be important. He's smiling. Not like a normal person, like it's a game to him. By the end of the session, the police had a description of the suspect detailed, enough to make a composite sketch. A week later, James Hoggart, a car repairman from the outskirts of town, was arrested. The Red Hawk patch of the car repair shop logo was on his work jacket. So was the scar across his right eyebrow. So were his gray eyes, which the detective who interrogated him said did indeed seem as cold as ice. For Evan Mercer, it was another success in a growing list of cases he had helped solve. A former clinical psychologist who specialized in traumatic amnesia, he had become an unofficial consultant to the police for the past 2 years on particularly difficult cases. His method of reconstructive hypnosis allowed witnesses to recall details that had seemed irretrievably lost in the fog of trauma and shock. But that evening, as news of Hoggart's arrest filled the local news, Evan sat in his office going over the tapes of his session with Catherine. Something was bothering him, Something about her description seemed too clear, too specific for a memory retrieved from a traumatic block. He put down his notes and went to the window. The rain had gotten heavier, turning the streets into blurry rivers of light from the street lamps and headlights of passing cars. The city lived its own life, unaware of the inner struggle of the man who was helping to restore fragments of the past, to restore justice in the present. Evan couldn't help but think that there was a fundamental problem with his method. A problem that his colleagues had warned him about when he first started working with the police. Human memory is plastic. It doesn't store events like videotapes that can simply be played back. It reconstructs them every time we access them, and in the process they change, especially when influenced by suggestion. But his method worked. Criminals were put behind bars. Victims got closure. Wasn't that more important than theoretical concerns about the purity of memories? The ringing of the telephone pulled him out of his thoughts. "Dr. Mercer, this is Detective Morgan. We have a new case. The disappearance of a teenage girl. The only witness is her younger sister, but she is in a state of shock and cannot describe what happened coherently. We need your help." Evan glanced at his watch. It was almost midnight, but time was of the essence in these cases. "I'll be there in 20 minutes, he replied, already taking out his car keys. On the way to the police station, Evan thought about how his life had changed in the last 2 years. From a respected but little-known outside academic circles psychologist, he had become a local celebrity. The man who helps you remember the unmemorable, as one local newspaper article called him. His method was discussed at conferences. He was invited to speak to psychology students. His name had become synonymous with success in solving difficult cases. But with fame came pressure. Each new case was a test, each session a balancing act between helping and potentially harming. And with each success, expectations grew, from the police, the public, and himself. At the police station, he was met by Detective Morgan, a short woman with short dark hair and a look that seemed to see right through a person. Next to her sat a girl of about 10, wrapped in a blanket, with an empty look and traces of tears on her face. Emma Parker. 10. Rachel said quietly, pulling Evan aside. Her sister, Lily, 16, disappeared this evening. They were coming back from a movie. According to Emma, a car pulled up, a man got out and dragged Lily inside. Emma ran and hid. When she came back, the car and her sister were gone. Was she able to describe the car? The man? Just that the car was dark, and that the man was scary. Nothing else specific. She's in shock, Dr. Mercer, but if Lily has indeed been abducted, we don't have much time. Evan nodded. He knew the statistics on kidnappings. The first 24 hours were critical. I need a quiet room, and my parents' permission to work with Emma. Everything is ready. Her parents have signed the consent. They are ready to do anything just to find Lily. The interrogation room had been transformed as much as possible. Bright lights had been removed, more comfortable chairs had been brought in. A glass of water stood on the table, and there was a soft toy, a plush rabbit that Emma had brought with her. Evan sat down across from the girl, trying to look as friendly and safe as possible. "Hi, Emma. My name is Dr. Mercer, but you can call me Evan." The girl didn't answer. She just hugged the stuffed rabbit tighter. "I know something really scary happened today, and I know you want to help find Lily. I'm here to help you remember details that might help the police find your sister." Emma looked up, a glimmer of hope in her eyes. "Will you find Lily?" We're all trying very hard, Emma, and your help could make all the difference. He explained the process of hypnosis to her in simple terms, made sure that she agreed and was not afraid, and only then began the immersion. With children, it was necessary to be especially careful. Their memory is even more flexible than that of adults, more susceptible to suggestion. As Emma fell into a light trance, he began to guide her through the memories of the evening. You and Lily are leaving the cinema. What movie did you see, Emma? The Princess and the Dragon. The girl's voice became quieter but clearer. Lily said it was childish, but she came with me anyway. She always does what I want. That's very sweet of her. What happened after the movie? We were walking home. Lily was holding my hand and telling me about school, about some boy she liked. Which street were you walking down? Along Maple Street, where the big bookstore is. And what happened next? Emma frowned, her breathing quickening. A car. It was driving slowly, as if it was following us. Can you describe the car, Emma? What color is it? Dark, black probably, or dark blue, big. Like a Jeep or like a sedan? Pause. Emma was clearly trying to remember. Like Jake's dad. He took us on a picnic. Jeep, SUV. Yes, it's that big. Very good, Emma. You're doing great. What happened next? The car stopped. A man got out. Lily told me to run. She pushed me and screamed, "Run, Emma!" And I ran. I hid behind the trash cans. Did you see the man who got out of the car? Yes. He was tall, in dark clothes. Can you remember his face? Emma shook her head, tears welling up in her eyes. I didn't see. It was dark, and I was afraid. Evan knew it was dangerous to push any further. He could cause more trauma, or worse, instill in her details that weren't there. It's okay, Emma. You've been very helpful already. Maybe you noticed anything special about the car. Stickers? Damage? The girl frowned again, concentrating. There was something on the back window. White. Like letters or numbers. License plate? No, on the glass. A sticker. Can you remember what was written there? Something about university? I'm not sure. Evan made a mental note. The university sticker on the rear window was a clue. There was a major university in their town, and many of the students and faculty had stickers like that. What happened after you hid? I heard Lily scream. Then the car door slammed, and she drove away. I waited until it was quiet, and then I got out. But Lily was gone, and I ran home. I ran as fast as I could. By the end of the session, the police had a description of the car. A dark Jeep or SUV with a university sticker on the rear window, and a rough location of the abduction. It wasn't enough to make an immediate breakthrough, but it was a concrete detail they could work with. Detective Morgan thanked Evan and promised to keep him updated on the investigation. As he was about to leave, she stopped him in the hallway. Dr. Mercer, there's something else. We've received the DNA results on the Hoggart case. Evan froze, feeling a chill run down his spine. And? His DNA does not match the samples found on Jessica Wright's body. But Catherine's testimony. We checked his alibi again. On the night of the murder, he was indeed on the other side of town. There is footage from a surveillance camera at a gas station. The time matches. Evan felt the ground slipping from under his feet. Catherine remembered the details so clearly. The logo, the scar, the cold grey eyes. Details that pointed specifically to Hoggart, details that turned out to be false. We released him this morning. Rachel continued. He's filing a complaint for false arrest, and probably a lawsuit against the department. I'm sorry, was all Evan could say. I don't understand how this could have happened. Rachel looked at him for a long moment. Me too, Dr. Mercer. Me too. That night, Evan didn't sleep. He replayed the session with Catherine over and over in his head, trying to figure out where he'd gone wrong. How could she have remembered details so clearly that pointed to a specific person when that person wasn't the attacker? And a more disturbing question: how many more of his successful cases could have been based on similar false memories? In the morning, he called his old professor from the university, Dr. Alan Bernstein, a leading expert on memory and cognitive biases. Alan, I need your help. And your honesty. He told about what had happened, about his doubts, about the fear that his method could lead to the accusation of an innocent person. Evan, I warned you about this when you first started working with the police, Alan said, his voice not accusing but rather regretful. Hypnosis is a powerful tool, but it is not a time machine. It does not restore the past to its original state. It creates a narrative based on fragments of memory, emotional associations, and, yes, expectations of both the patient and the hypnotist. But I was always careful. I never suggested specific details. Not intentionally, perhaps. But suggestion can be subtle, Evan. Tone of voice, choice of words, even pauses between questions. All of these can guide a patient towards certain memories. Especially if that patient wants to help, wants to give the right answers. Evan remained silent, realizing that his mentor was right. What should I do, Alan? Rethink your method, be even more careful, and perhaps recognize that in some cases it is better to say I don't know than to risk creating false memories. After the conversation, Evan sat in his office for a long time looking at the diplomas and certificates hanging on the wall, evidence of his education, his qualifications, his right to help people restore the lost pieces of their lives. But what if, instead of restoring, he was creating these fragments? What if his desire to help, his confidence in his method, his own prejudices and expectations were shaping the memories of his patients? The ringing of the telephone interrupted his thoughts. It was Detective Morgan. Dr. Mercer, we have a breakthrough in the Lily Parker kidnapping case. Patrol officers found a dark blue Ford Explorer with a university sticker parked outside an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town. There were signs of a struggle inside. We are preparing an operation to storm the warehouse. We think she may be there. That's good news. Evan felt a surge of hope. Maybe the information Emma had given him had been accurate after all. Maybe his method had worked, at least in some cases. Yes, and it's thanks to you and Emma. I'll call when I have news. Evan hung up and walked over to the window. The rain had stopped, but the sky remained overcast, as if reflecting his inner state, a ray of hope amidst the clouds of doubt. He knew he was about to undergo a major rethink of his method, his practice, perhaps his entire career. But the important thing now was that the information he had provided could help the police save the kidnapped girl, and it was worth all the doubts and worries. The clock on the wall continued to tick, measuring out seconds, minutes, hours, time that could not be returned, but which could perhaps still be remembered correctly. Lily Parker was found alive. The raid on the abandoned warehouse was a success, and the 16-year-old returned to her family, bruised and scared, but physically, relatively unharmed. Her abductor was Marcus Jenkins, a 32-year-old assistant professor at a local university whose dark blue Ford Explorer with a university sticker matched the description Emma had given her under hypnosis. For the police department, it was a clear victory. For Evan Mercer, it was a moment of conflicting emotions. He sat in his office, rereading the newspaper article about Lily's rescue. A photo of the smiling Parker family dominated the front page. The article mentioned his contribution. Thanks to Dr. Evan Mercer's innovative technique, key details were obtained from the kidnapped girl's younger sister. Evan put the paper down and rubbed his temples. His success with the Parker case hadn't dispelled the doubts he'd had since the James Hoggart fiasco. If anything, it had reinforced them. If his method could lead to both the mistaken arrest of an innocent man and the rescue of a kidnapped child, where was the line between recovering genuine memories and creating false ones? The doorbell rang, interrupting his thoughts. Laura Chen, a small woman with sharp eyes and a determined expression, stood there. She was a professor of neuropsychology at Riverside University, an expert on false memories, and a longtime critic of Evan's methods. Dr. Mercer. She extended her hand for a formal handshake. Thank you for agreeing to meet with me. Evan invited her in, feeling a strange mixture of wariness and relief. Part of him was afraid of what Laura might say about his methods. Another part was desperate for an honest assessment from someone who wasn't blinded by his success. I suppose you're here about the Hoggart case, he said, as they settled into chairs opposite each other. Not only that, Laura said, pulling a folder of papers out of her bag. I've been studying your methods for some time now, Dr. Mercer. I've been analyzing transcripts of sessions, comparing witnesses' initial statements with what they remembered under hypnosis. And I've discovered disturbing patterns. She opened the folder and placed several graphs and tables on the table. In now 78% of cases, the recovered memories contained details that matched the investigators' preliminary theories. Details that were not in the original testimony, but which appeared after your sessions. Evan studied the documents, feeling a chill run down his spine. The numbers didn't lie. Statistical analysis showed a clear correlation between the direction of the investigation and the memories retrieved during his sessions. It could be a coincidence, he said, but his voice sounded unconvincing even to himself. It could be that the investigation was headed in the right direction from the start, and the witnesses' recollections simply confirmed it. Perhaps, Laura agreed, but her tone made it clear she thought otherwise. But there is another explanation. You may have been unconsciously guiding your patients to memories that fit pre-existing theories of the effect. Evan wanted to object, but then he remembered the session with Catherine Wilson. Hadn't he known in advance about the police's suspicions about Hoggart? Hadn't he studied his file before the session? Hadn't he been forming an image of the criminal in his mind that he could then implicitly convey to Catherine through his tone, a voice, his choice of words, even the pauses between questions? I didn't do it on purpose, he said finally. I know, Laura said softly. You believed you were helping, that you were restoring the truth. But subconsciously you may have been guiding your patients to conclusions you believed were correct. She took another document out of the folder, a scientific article on the suggestibility of memory under hypnosis. Research shows that people under hypnosis are particularly susceptible to suggestion. They are eager to please the hypnotist, to give the right answers. and they often cannot distinguish between real memories and those created during the session. Evan picked up the article but didn't read it. He knew the research. He knew the risks. But he believed that his method, his caution, his professionalism would allow him to avoid those pitfalls. Now he wasn't sure about that. "What do you propose?" he asked, feeling a strange relief at finally voicing the question that had been tormenting him for the last few days. "Review all your methods, all the cases you were involved in, especially those where evidence obtained under hypnosis was key to the prosecution." Evan nodded. It made sense. It was right. And it was scary. "I'll help you," Laura added, sounding sympathetic for the first time. "Not as an accuser, but as a colleague. We can develop more robust protocols that minimize the risk of suggestion." After Laura left, Evan sat still for a long time, looking at the papers she had left behind. Before him lay not just a critique of his methods. Before him lay the potential destruction of everything he had built over the past years. His reputation, his career, his self-respect. But what if the price of his success is the freedom of innocent people? What if his confidence in his method has led to miscarriages of justice, to ruined lives? The ringing of the telephone pulled him out of his gloomy thoughts. "Dr. Mercer, this is Detective Morgan. We have a new case and we need your help again." Evan felt his heart clench. He should have refused. He should have said he was reconsidering his methods, that he couldn't risk creating false memories. But then Rachel described the case, a series of disappearances of young women, the last of whom miraculously escaped, but was in a state of deep psychological shock and could not coherently describe what had happened. "You're the only one who can help her remember, Evan," Rachel said. "Without her testimony we have nothing, and while we're stuck, he's choosing his next victim." And Evan agreed, because despite all his doubts, he couldn't turn away from the opportunity to save lives, because maybe this time he would be careful enough, objective enough, to avoid the traps of his own subconscious. Because, in the end, some crimes were too terrible to go unpunished, even if the price of justice was blurring the lines between truth and construction. Melissa Clark was found on the side of a country road, battered, disoriented but alive, unlike 5 other young women who have gone missing in the past 8 months and are still missing. In the hospital room, she seemed smaller than her 22 years, a frail figure under white sheets, with bruises on her face and arms, her gaze blank and staring into space. "Psychological trauma," the doctors explained, a defense mechanism of the brain blocking out unbearable memories. Evan sat next to her bed, carefully establishing rapport, that special connection between hypnotist and patient that allows the barriers of consciousness to be overcome. "Melissa, I'm here to help you." His voice was soft, soothing. "You're safe. No one is going to hurt you. I just want to help you remember what happened so the police can find the person who did this to you." The girl nodded weakly, her eyes still, unfocused, but there was something like awareness in them. "I want you to focus on my voice," Evan continued. "Feel your body relaxing. Feel the tension leaving with each breath." Melissa gradually entered a hypnotic trance. Her breathing deepened, her muscles relaxed, her gaze became more focused, though directed inward rather than outward. "Melissa, I want you to go back to the moment before you passed out on the highway. What's the last thing you remember?" I was running." Her voice was quiet but clear. "It was dark. I didn't know where I was. I just ran until I saw the lights of cars on the highway. Okay, Melissa. What happened before that? Where were you running from? A house? No, not a house. Some kind of building. Dark, with small windows. Can you describe how you ended up in this building? Melissa frowned, her breathing becoming more ragged. I was coming home from work. It was late. My car wouldn't start. I was waiting for a taxi, and then a car pulled up. A man asked if I needed help. Can you describe this man, Melissa? He was normal, not scary, in a suit like he was coming home from work. I thought he was safe. Evan paused, carefully, considering his next question. He had to be especially careful not to direct her toward a specific image. What happened next? I walked up to his car, and then I felt a prick in my neck, and everything went blurry. Did you wake up in that building? Yes, in a room, a small one, with a mattress on the floor. There was a smell. Strange. What smell, Melissa? Chemical, like a hospital, but different, and also old books. Yes, it smelled like old books. Evan felt his heart speed up. The smell of old books. It was a specific detail that could help identify the place. Did you see the man who held you there? Sometimes. He came in gloves and in a mask, a medical mask. Can you describe anything else? His eyes, hair, any distinguishing marks? Melissa frowned, concentrating, eyes light, cold, as if I'm not human to him, as if I'm an experiment. Evan made a mental note. The light eyes, the clinical approach to the victims. It could indicate someone with a medical or scientific background. At that moment, details from the case files he had studied before the session came to mind. Among the suspects was Victor Ramirez, the owner of an auto repair shop located near the locations of several of the disappearances. He had an alibi for all the dates, but Detective Morgan thought his alibi was shaky. Another suspect was Alan Bishop, a school teacher who had recently moved to town. Quiet, withdrawn, and living alone in a large house inherited from his parents, he was described by his neighbors as a strange but harmless man. Evan found himself thinking that the image of Bishop, intelligent, perhaps with a cool, analytical mind, was more in line with Melissa's description. He immediately pulled himself up short. This was how false memories were formed, by unconsciously directing the patient towards an image that had already formed in the hypnotist's head. Melissa, I want you to focus only on what you actually remember. Don't try to guess or assume. If you're not sure about something, just say, I don't know. The girl nodded, her face tense with concentration. What else can you remember about the place where you were held? Any details could be important. There were sounds from above, like someone was walking, and also a bell, like at school but not as loud, an old one, the school bell. Evan felt a chill run down his spine. Bishop was a teacher. Could he have kept an old school bell? Or was it a coincidence? Did you see anything else in the room? Anything that might indicate what kind of place this was? There were books on the shelf. I saw them when he left the door open. Lots of books. Books. The smell of old books. The school bell. Everything pointed to Bishop, the literature teacher living in his parents' old house. But Evan couldn't afford to jump to that conclusion. He couldn't risk Melissa being directed to a specific suspect based on his own assumptions. Melissa, how did you manage to escape? He forgot to lock the door, or the lock was broken. I'm not sure. I just saw the door was ajar and ran. He tried to catch me, but I was faster. By the end of the session, Evan had several specific details: a building with small windows, a basement, the smell of old books and chemicals, a school bell, bookshelves. Details that could help police identify the place where Melissa and possibly other missing women were being held. But he also felt uneasy. Despite his best efforts to remain objective, the details Melissa remembered matched Alan Bishop's profile all too well. Was it a coincidence? Or had he unknowingly directed her toward this image? When he relayed information to Detective Morgan, he was extremely careful in his wording. "These are just fragments of memories, Rachel. They can be distorted by trauma, fear, even the hypnosis process itself. You shouldn't base your entire investigation on them alone." But Rachel was already fired up with the idea of checking out Bishop's house. A basement with bookshelves, a school bell. These are too specific to be coincidences. We'll get a search warrant. Evan wanted to argue, to warn against jumping to conclusions. But part of him believed that Bishop really could be the culprit. And if so, hesitating could cost the next victim his life. He remained silent as Rachel left, feeling the weight of responsibility pressing down on his shoulders. What if he had been wrong again? What if his method had led to false memories again, to the accusation of an innocent man? Or what if he's right this time, and his doubts will only give the criminal time to escape or destroy evidence? Evan didn't know the answer. He could only wait and hope that this time the truth, whatever it was, would prevail. But somewhere deep inside he knew that truth, like memory, was not something fixed, unchanging. It was a process, a constant striving for clarity through the fog of subjectivity and prejudice. And in this striving, in this continuous search, lies the real work of the memory restorer. The search of Alan Bishop's home began at 6:30 a.m. 4 unmarked police cars and a forensics van pulled up to the old two-story Victorian house on a quiet street lined with maple trees. Neighbors peered through curtains to watch as Detective Morgan presented a search warrant to the stunned homeowner. Evan watched from his car, parked a half-block away. He wasn't supposed to be here. His presence wasn't required for the search, and Detective Morgan hadn't invited him. But he couldn't stand by, couldn't just wait for news. Too much depended on the outcome of this search. Alan Bishop did not match the image of the monster Evan had unwittingly conjured up in his mind. He was a thin, middle-aged man with a receding hairline and thick glasses, wearing a plaid robe over his pajamas. He looked confused and scared when the police entered his home, but he did not resist. The search lasted almost 3 hours. Evan watched as officers carried out boxes of evidence, as forensics officers took pictures of something inside the house. Finally, Detective Morgan came out onto the porch and made a call on her cell phone. A few seconds later, Evan's phone rang. "You have to see this," Rachel said without preamble. "We found the basement, and it's just like Melissa described." Evan felt his heart skip a beat. He parked his car in front of Bishop's house and walked quickly inside, following Detective Morgan. The house was exactly what one might imagine a lonely schoolteacher's home to be. Neat, a little old-fashioned, with bookshelves lining the walls, and stacks of papers on every horizontal surface. But Rachel led him not into the living quarters, but to an inconspicuous door under the stairs. "The basement," she said, opening the door. "Bishop claims he hasn't been down here in years, that it was his father's territory. But the door was recently oiled, and there's no dust on the steps." They descended the steep stairs into the basement. The first thing Evan noticed was the smell. a mixture of old books and chemicals, just as Melissa had described. As his eyes adjusted to the dim light, he saw the rest. The basement was divided into two parts. The first contained old bookcases, filled with volumes in tattered bindings. On a table by the wall lay stacks of yellowed papers and an old brass school bell, exactly the kind that might have been used in schools half a century ago. But the second part of the basement gave Evan a chill. It was separated by a heavy door with a new lock, and was something between a cell and a hospital room. A mattress on the floor, a bucket in the corner, a chain attached to the wall, and on a small table, medical instruments, syringes, vials with clear liquid. "We found DNA from 5 different women," Rachel said quietly, "including Melissa Clark and 3 of the 5 missing. Testing is still ongoing, but it's clear this is where he kept his victims." Evan was silent, trying to comprehend what he had seen. All the details matched what Melissa had remembered under hypnosis. The basement, the smell of old books and chemicals, the school bell, the bookshelves, even the small windows near the ceiling through which a dim light shone. "Where is Bishop?" he finally asked. "Already at the police station. So far he refuses to talk, demands a lawyer, but with such evidence he can't get away with it." Evan nodded, but a strange uneasiness was growing inside him. It was all too perfect, too much like Melissa's description, as if someone had recreated the crime scene from her account rather than the other way around. But that was absurd. The evidence was real. The DNA didn't lie. Alan Bishop was guilty, and Evan's method had caught him. So why did he feel this nagging anxiety? The news of Alan Bishop's arrest exploded in the local media. School teacher serial kidnapper, Maple Street monster. Hero psychologist helps solve kidnapping case, screamed in newspaper and news website headlines. Evan's photo appeared on the front page, next to a photo of Bishop in handcuffs. For the police department, it was a resounding victory. For the victims' families, it was a welcome relief and the beginning of the healing process. For Evan, it was a moment of professional triumph that should have dispelled his doubts about his own method. But the doubts did not disappear. They just lurked, like a predator before the jump. A week after Bishop's arrest, Evan received an unexpected call from Laura Chen. "Have you seen Melissa Clark's toxicology results?" she asked without preamble. "No. Why?" "Traces of scopolamine were found in her blood. It is popularly known as the zombie drug, or devil's breath. It causes a state of high suggestibility and memory loss." Evan frowned. He knew about scopolamine, a drug that was used in medicine in small doses, but in certain concentrations could turn a person into an obedient puppet, carrying out any commands and not remembering it later. "What do you mean?" "What I'm saying is that Melissa's memories may not have just been distorted by trauma or the hypnosis process. They may have been completely fabricated under the influence of the drug." Evan felt a chill run down his spine. But the evidence, DNA in Bishop's basement. "I'm not saying Bishop is innocent. I'm saying we have to be especially careful with testimony obtained under hypnosis from a person who was under the influence of scopolamine." After this conversation, Evan's concerns only grew. He began his own investigation, studying the case materials that he was able to obtain through his connections with the police. And the more he dug, the more questions arose. Why was there scopolamine in Melissa's blood, but Bishop didn't keep the drug in his basement? Why, despite the abundance of evidence in the basement, was nothing suspicious found in the rest of the house? Why did Bishop, presumably an experienced kidnapper, leave the cell door unlocked, allowing Melissa to escape? And the most disturbing question: what if the details Melissa remembered under hypnosis were not memories, but suggestions, either from the kidnapper under the influence of scopolamine or from Evan himself during the session? Evan decided to meet Bishop. It was not easy. The teacher was in pre-trial detention and access to him was limited. But Evan's status as a police consultant and his role in the case allowed a meeting to be arranged for further assessment of the suspect's psychological state. Alan Bishop, sitting across the table in the interrogation room, looked haggard and older. His prison uniform hung on his thin shoulders like a coat rack, but his eyes behind his glasses were clear and focused. "Dr. Mercer," he nodded as Evan walked in. "I've read about your method. Interesting." "Mr. Bishop," Evan sat down across from him, "I'm not here as a prosecutor. I just want to understand." "Understand what?" "How I kidnapped and tortured women in my basement." Bishop's voice was bitter. "I didn't do it. I never went down there. That was my father's territory, and after he died, I just locked the door and forgot about it." "Then how do you explain the evidence? The DNA of the missing women?" "I can't explain it." Bishop shook his head. "There's been some kind of mistake or someone set me up." Evan watched him carefully. Over the years, he had learned to recognize the signs of lying, micro-expressions, changes in tone of voice, involuntary movements. Bishop showed none of these. "Who could have set you up, and why?" "I don't know. I have no enemies. I'm a simple literature teacher. I live quietly. I don't conflict with anyone." Evan considered this. The idea of a setup seemed far-fetched, especially given the abundance of evidence. But something about the case continued to bother him. "Mr. Bishop, do you know Victor Ramirez?" Bishop frowned, clearly surprised by the question. "Ramirez? The owner of the auto repair shop on Industrial Road?" "Yeah, he fixed my car a few times." "Why?" "He was one of the suspects in the kidnapping case before your arrest." "Really?" Bishop looked genuinely surprised. "I didn't know. He always seemed normal. A little rough around the edges maybe, but not a kidnapper." Evan made a mental note. The connection between Bishop and Ramirez was an unexpected detail that could be significant. "When was the last time you visited his workshop?" "About a month ago. I had problems with the brakes." "A month ago? Around the time of the last kidnapping before Melissa Clark. Did he come to your home? Could he have access to the basement?" Bishop shook his head. "No, I left the car at the workshop for the day, but..." He suddenly fell silent, as if remembering something. "But I lost a set of spare keys around the same time. Thought I'd just misplaced them. But I never found them." Evan felt a chill run down his spine. Spare keys that could include the key to the basement. Ramirez, who had access to Bishop's car, where those keys could be. It was a thin thread, but it could lead to an alternative version of events. After meeting Bishop, Evan went straight to Detective Morgan. He told her about his doubts, about the scopolamine in Melissa's blood, about the possible connection between Bishop and Ramirez. "Are you serious?" Rachel looked at him incredulously. "We have DNA, a crime scene, a victim's statement, and you're suggesting a conspiracy theory about a frame-up?" "I'm just asking that we check all the leads," Evan insisted. "Check Ramirez's alibi again. Analyze where the scopolamine in Melissa's system came from. Make sure we're not sending an innocent man to prison." "Like Hoggart?" Rachel asked quietly. Evan nodded, feeling a pang of guilt. Exactly. I don't want to repeat that mistake. Rachel sighed but eventually agreed to do more research. Not because she believed Bishop was innocent, but because she wanted to make sure the case would stand up to trial. Evan spent the next 2 weeks on edge, waiting for the results. He couldn't sleep, couldn't concentrate on his work. His mind was on the Bishop case and the possibility that his method had once again led to a wrongful conviction. Finally, Rachel called him late in the evening. "You were right," she said without preamble, and Evan felt his heart skip a beat. "We checked Ramirez's alibi again. The night Melissa went missing, he was supposedly at a poker tournament in a nearby town. But surveillance footage shows he left the tournament for a few hours, just long enough to return to town, kidnap Melissa and drive away again. What about scopolamine? We searched Ramirez's house. We found a stash of chemicals in the garage, including scopolamine, and DNA from Melissa and the other 2 missing women." Evan closed his eyes, feeling a wave of relief and horror wash over him. He framed Bishop? Looks like it. Used the stolen keys to gain access to the basement, created a fake crime scene there, moved the evidence, and put Melissa on scopolamine, and implanted details that would point to Bishop, the smell of books, the school bell, etc. But why? What is the motive? We're still investigating. But first, Ramirez was obsessed with the idea of becoming a serial killer who would be talked about. He studied other serial killers, their methods, how they were caught. And apparently, he decided to create the perfect crime. One for which another person would be convicted, but he would remain free and be able to continue. Evan felt sick to his stomach. The thought that his method could help this twisted plan come to fruition was unbearable. What's wrong with Bishop? All charges will be dropped. He will be released tomorrow morning. After his conversation with Rachel, Evan sat in the darkness of his office for a long time, trying to process what had happened. His method had not created false memories, at least not this time. Melissa had indeed remembered what she had seen and heard. But what she had seen and heard was a carefully orchestrated production created by Ramirez to frame an innocent man. This was a new level of memory manipulation, not through hypnosis or suggestion, but through the creation of false memories in real time under the influence of a drug. And Evan didn't know how to protect himself from such manipulation. How to distinguish genuine memories not only from those suggested during hypnosis, but also from those artificially created by the criminal himself. The thought was terrifying. It undermined the very foundation of his work, his belief in the possibility of restoring truth through memory. But it also confirmed his growing conviction: memory was not a reliable witness. It was malleable, vulnerable, subject not only to internal factors, trauma, fear, the desire to please, but also to external manipulation. And if he wanted to continue his work, helping to solve crimes and find justice for victims, he needed to develop new protocols, new verification methods that would take this vulnerability into account. Evan picked up the phone and dialed Laura Chen's number. "Laura, this is Evan Mercer. I need your help. I'm ready to completely revise my method." There was a short pause on the other end of the line, and then Laura answered, "I'm glad to hear it, Evan. It's about time." And in that moment, Evan felt a strange relief, as if the weight he had been carrying for years, the weight of doubts, half-truths, compromises with his own conscience, had begun to lift from his shoulders. The truth was more complicated than he thought. Memory was less reliable than he had hoped. But recognizing these limitations was the first step toward creating a more honest, more accurate way to work with human memories. A method that recognized the fragility of memory and sought not absolute truth, but the greatest possible accuracy in the world of subjective experience. And perhaps that was the best a memory restorer could hope for. The conference room at Riverside University was packed. Psychologists, neuroscientists, criminologists, lawyers, all had come to hear a presentation on a new traumatic memory protocol developed jointly by Dr. Evan Mercer and Professor Laura Chen. A protocol that could change the way witness testimony is handled in criminal justice. Evan stood at the lectern, looking out at the audience. 3 years ago, he couldn't have imagined himself here, admitting the limitations of his method, speaking openly about his mistakes. 3 years ago, his ego wouldn't have survived this blow. "Memory is not a video recording," he began, his voice amplified by a microphone and carried through the room. "It is a reconstruction, created each time anew from fragments of experience, emotion, knowledge, and expectations. And this reconstruction is vulnerable to internal distortion, external manipulation, and even deliberate falsification." On the large screen behind him, graphs and charts appeared, the results of a 3-year study he and Laura had conducted. "We examined 147 cases in which testimony obtained through hypnosis or other memory recovery techniques played a key role in the conviction. In 23% of these cases, significant discrepancies were found between the recovered memories and the objective evidence. In 12% of cases, these discrepancies were serious enough to cast doubt on the conviction." Evan paused, giving the audience time to absorb the numbers. 12%. 1 in 8 people convicted on the basis of recovered memories could have been innocent. But that doesn't mean we should abandon traumatic memory work entirely, he continued. It means we should be more cautious, more skeptical, more scientific in our approach. He went on to describe a new protocol, a multi-stage verification system that included independent assessment, cross-checking with objective evidence, and analysis of possible sources of memory contamination. We call this the transparent reconstruction protocol. Its goal is not just to reconstruct memories, but to assess their reliability, their potential accuracy, their evidentiary value. The presentation was followed by a heated but constructive discussion. Some practicing psychologists expressed concerns that the new protocol would restrict their work too much. Lawyers asked about its applicability in court. Neuroscientists suggested additional verification methods based on the latest brain research. Evan answered questions honestly, not trying to defend his position at all costs, acknowledging the limitations of even the new protocol. It was unusual to be vulnerable, to acknowledge uncertainty. But in that vulnerability he found a new strength, the strength of intellectual honesty. When the official part was over, a middle-aged woman with tired eyes and a determined expression approached him. "Dr. Mercer, I'm Elizabeth Grant. You may not remember me." Evan remembered. How could he forget? Elizabeth had witnessed a jewelry store robbery that ended with the murder of a security guard. Under hypnosis, she remembered the details that led to the arrest of the Donovan brothers. Brothers who had an airtight alibi. "I remember you, Mrs. Grant," he said softly, "and I would like to apologize." "No need," she interrupted. "That's not why I came. I wanted to tell you that I finally remembered. Really remembered. No hypnosis, no pressure, just woke up one morning and the memory was there, clear as day. Evan tensed. He knew all too well how memory worked, how it could create memories that seemed real but were actually constructs created from fragments of information received after the event. What do you remember, Mrs. Grant? A face. Not the Donovan brothers. I was wrong then, and I'm sorry. Another face. I saw it again by chance on the news, and then everything fell into place. She pulled a newspaper clipping out of her bag and handed it to Evan. The photo showed Victor Ramirez handcuffed, being led into the courthouse. It's him, the man from the jewelry store. Evan looked at Elizabeth carefully. Her eyes were clear, her gaze confident. But he couldn't just accept this memory on faith. Not after everything he'd learned about the malleability of memory. Mrs. Grant, you saw this photograph on the news. Perhaps your brain made an association. I know how memory works, Dr. Mercer. She interrupted him gently. I've read all your articles since that incident, and I understand your doubts. But there's more. She reached into her bag again and pulled out a small notebook. After that incident with the Donovan brothers, I started keeping a memory journal, writing down everything I could remember about that day, without hypnosis, without pressure. Just letting the memories come naturally. And look. She opened the notebook to a page dated 2 years earlier, long before Ramirez was arrested in the kidnapping case. I remembered another detail today. The robber had a strange accent, like Spanish, but not quite. And the smell of machine oil, like in a car repair shop. Evan read the entry. Ramirez was a Venezuelan immigrant, with a distinctive accent, and the owner of an auto repair shop. I'm not saying it's proof, Elizabeth continued. I understand that even these records may be unreliable. But maybe it's worth checking. Maybe Ramirez is connected to other unsolved crimes besides the kidnappings. Evan nodded, feeling a war within him between professional skepticism and an intuitive feeling that Elizabeth might be right. I'll pass this information on to Detective Morgan, he said, but no expectations or promises. We'll follow protocol, a thorough background check, looking for objective evidence, assessing the reliability of memories. I don't ask for more, Elizabeth smiled. Just the truth, whatever it may be. After Elizabeth left, Laura Chen approached Evan. A difficult case? She asked, nodding towards the retreating woman. Like all of them, Evan sighed. Memory is never simple. But we have better tools to work with it now. Laura put a hand on his shoulder. You've come a long way, Evan. From the man who helps. You remember the unmemorable to a scientist who recognizes the limitations of memory and seeks ways to overcome them. Evan smiled. It had been a long journey indeed, from a self-assured memory restorer to a researcher who recognized the complexity and ambiguity of his subject. You know what's ironic? He said. I started this work because I believed in the power of memory, in the possibility of restoring the truth, and I came to understand that memory is one of the most unreliable things in the human experience. And yet, Laura said thoughtfully, even with all its distortions and vulnerabilities, memory is all we have. Our personal history, our understanding of the world, our sense of self, all of it is based on memory. That's why it's so important to understand its limitations. Evan nodded. Not to give up on the search for truth, but to seek it with open eyes, recognizing the difficulty of that search. They walked out of the conference room into the cool autumn evening. The campus was beautiful at this time of year, trees in red and gold, students hurrying to evening classes, lanterns lit in the gathering dusk. "What next?" Laura asked. "After the protocol is published?" Evan thought about it. He had already received offers to write a book, to lecture at several prestigious universities, to become a consultant to the Federal Bureau of Investigation on issues of working with traumatic memory. But there was something else. A project he had been thinking about more and more in recent months. "I want to create a review center," he said, "for cases where convictions were based largely on recovered memories. Apply our new protocol retrospectively, help those who may have been wrongfully convicted." Laura nodded, not looking surprised. "Redemption?" "Partly," Evan admitted. "But more than that. More like coming full circle. I started this work to help find the truth, and I want to continue doing that. Just with more humility, with more awareness of the difficulty of it." They reached the parking lot, where their paths diverged. "You know," Laura said before leaving, "there's one thing I've always respected about you, even when I criticized your methods. You never stopped seeking the truth, even when it meant admitting your own mistakes." Evan smiled, touched by her words. "Maybe that's the real job of a memory restorer," he said. "Not to restore perfect memories, but to never stop searching for the truth, even though you know it will always be elusive, always incomplete." Laura nodded and said goodbye, heading for her car. Evan was left alone, looking out over the campus, the students, the autumn trees. The world was uncertain. Memory was unreliable, the truth was elusive, and yet it was worth continuing the search, not with the self-confidence of a man who knows all the answers, but with the humility of a researcher who understands the limitations of his knowledge. Not to reach the absolute truth, but to come as close to it as the imperfect human instruments of knowledge allow. In this humility, in this continuous striving for clarity through the fog of subjectivity and prejudice, lay the real work of the memory restorer. Evan got into his car and drove home, ready for a new chapter in his life, a chapter based not on the illusion of perfect knowledge, but on accepting the complexity and uncertainty of the human experience. And in this acceptance, he found not weakness, but a new strength, the strength of intellectual honesty, the strength of continuous search, the strength of humility in the face of the elusive but always desired truth. Epilogue. 6 months later, the Recovered Memory Review Center opened its doors. A small team of psychologists, lawyers, and criminologists, led by Evan Mercer, began working on the first 10 cases selected for review. One of these was the case of James Hoggart, a man wrongly convicted based on the memories of Catherine Wilson extracted under hypnosis by Evan. Another is the case of Alan Bishop, who, despite the charges being dropped, still suffered the consequences of his false arrest: loss of job, reputation, psychological trauma. The work was slow, painstaking, often thankless. Not all cases could be re-examined, not all mistakes could be corrected, but every small step toward the truth, every injustice corrected, gave Evan the feeling that he was on the right track. And on quiet evenings, when the work was finished and the office was empty, he would sometimes take out old notes from his first sessions from his desk drawer, with Catherine, with Elizabeth, with Melissa. He would reread them, analyze his mistakes, learn from them. Not to torment yourself with guilt, but to remember, memory is imperfect, Human knowledge is limited, and even the best intentions can lead to mistakes. And in this awareness, this constant reminder of the limits of his knowledge, he found not despair but hope. Hope that by recognizing our limitations, we can become better, wiser, closer to that elusive truth we all seek. In the end, perhaps that was the most important truth he had learned over the years. Truth was not something that could be reconstructed or constructed. It was a process, a constant quest for clarity through the fog of subjectivity and prejudice. And in this striving, in this continuous search, lies the real work of the memory restorer.